Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Quantum Listener. I'm David Ellis. For many people who say that they play an instrument, they'll usually say they play one and maybe two, play the violin and the piano or something like that. I play three, and all three of them are very similar to each other. So I thought today we would go through them one by one, and I thought we would look a little bit at the similarities and the differences to each other. Let's start with the cello. Alright, we'll start with this thing here. So this is your standard modern cello. This is what you'll usually see in most orchestras, in most recitals, string quartets, etc. Steel strings, it has a bow, an end pin. It's a little bit short because I'm sitting on a sofa. So just for base comparison, let's just play a scale. So let's just say G. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit more complicated. Alright, so this is the Viola da Gamba, and I learned this actually before Baroque cello. We're going to get to Baroque cello in just a minute. But this is an instrument that was made very popular during the Renaissance and Baroque periods. As you can see, this one has 7 strings. A lot of them have 6, the standard tuning for which is A, D, E, C, G, and D. This one has 7, so it has an extra one, low A. This is tuned to A equals 415 hertz. You may have heard of 440 hertz A. This is usually what you'll hear in an orchestra, so say the oboe plays an A for tuning purposes. That is a 440 hertz A. This A is 415, which is approximately a half step lower. We may go into tuning, but that will definitely be its own separate video. You can see that the strings are made out of gut. If you look carefully, you have frets. Well, as you can tell, these are movable frets. Now, one of the other things that you're going to notice is the bow. I'm holding it underhanded. A lot of the concerts that Viola da Gamba would have had would not be in places like Carnegie Hall. They would have been in living rooms probably about the size of this space, maybe the size of the living room you're in right now. Very intimate instrument, very soft instrument, but with a lot of color. All right. Essentially, the Baroque cello is a predecessor to the modern cello. It is not much different except maybe in tuning. But aside from that, the instrument is not that much different than its modern counterpart. A major difference that a lot of people will bring up is the lack of end pin. Neither does the gamba. Actually rather complementary instruments. If you've ever heard any of the Bach Passions, you will probably know that there are cello parts and there is a solo viola da gamba part. So it's not necessarily to say that the viola da gamba is a predecessor to the cello. Really, if anything, at one time the two were rivals. All different sizes of gamba, just like the cello. In other words, you would have violin-sized gambas. They're therefore interchangeable in certain ways. If you're playing a cantata, for instance, and there are cantatas like this, where you have to decide, are you going to go with the gamba or are you going to go with the cello? They each have their strengths and weaknesses. The Baroque cello, even though it is a predecessor, is still a bit louder than the gamba, so you have to think about that. But then the gamba has more range and has more clarity. Which one are you going to go with for certain gigs? The violone. This one here is a G violone. The bottom string is a G, S is the top string. Occasionally you will see D violones that go a fourth below this. This instrument would effectively be used as a double bass, certainly in smaller groups. For example, there are some Bach cantatas where you would want to have a double bass presence, or sometimes in the Brandenburg concertos it will have a violone part. This was not universal at the time, and that's kind of my point though, is the fact that at the time of Bach, at the time of Vivaldi, a lot of the decisions that we take for granted with regard to what instrument is being played for what piece were not quite as standardized then, and therefore the options were a little bit more open. So you will sometimes see discussion about whether or not this instrument alone might be part of a continuo section. It very much depends on the piece. But it's a complicated issue. The trip that I'm going on sometime, I want to say next month, I'll be gone for 2 weeks. I have only 2 gigs, but I'm bringing 3 instruments. This one, the viola da gamba and the baroque cello. Because we do know certain pieces require very specific instruments that might not necessarily work with other pieces, but also to a degree it's experimentation. That, and I am young and stupid enough and willing enough to bring all 3 instruments in my car with me and lug them everywhere for 2 weeks. It's really good exercise. Well, these days I do want to talk more about the specifics about each of the instruments, especially when it comes to, say, viola da gamba versus cello with certain interpretational aspects. That'll have to wait for another day. I will say, though, that I'm off this week to play with the group that I love playing with, Les Soûls d'Amour. More info down below. Also down below, you will see a link to the website for the Viola da Gamba Society of America. That site has so much information. But for now, I will say have a good week. I will see you next week where we will talk about another project that I have coming up. Look forward to seeing you at the next video.